close with Dalian. Dalian was involved in procurement, the Treasury Board, and Department of Defense, all three positions which you have held. Were you familiar with Dalian? Were you aware that they were completing this type of contracting, this type of work, double dipping?
Minister, you were the Public Services and Procurement Minister when this whole Arrive scam journey started. Can you help us with this key question? Who made the decision to choose GC Strategies?
Do you agree with a majority of Canadians that there is a serious problem in this country with government contracting?
This Guy's Garage. Like and subscribe.
Minister, it would be difficult for me to express a greater level of disappointment than I feel on behalf of Canadians today. First of all, this year, we have a $40 billion deficit. And as you know, I hold you personally responsible, as you are the one who signs the checks, who releases the money from the Government of Canada. Secondly, we received this report from the Parliamentary Budgetary Officer regarding the $500 million. The two greatest line items, Minister, are lapsed funds and departmental reserves. Hardly new savings, hardly a safe place for Canadians, Minister. And then, Minister, we know, of course, today that you released these guidelines, because apparently your guidelines of October 5th, 2023 didn't work, because we also received in the media today the news of $5 million in the first wave, only the first wave of fraudulent billing found in contracting. We know what's been going on with Arrive scam and GC Strategies. We know what's been going on with Dalian. I want you to tell Canadians today how many federal employees are also collecting contracts with the federal government. Give me that number, please. How many federal employees are also collecting contracts with the federal government? Do you have that number for me today?
There is an RCMP investigation relating to the employees as mentioned by Minister Duclos. And in addition, we have a call out through the Comptroller General's office for a cross-government comprehensive list of items as requested in your question.
We don't know the number. We don't know the number right now of how many federal employees are double dipping, who have these jobs with the federal government and are also collecting funds through contracts with the federal government. Minister, my next question is, can you identify within the $5 million, which was announced today in the media by Bill Curry in the Globe and Mail, how much of that is attributed to Arrive scam? How much of the $5 million is involved in the Arrive scam scandal?
Those items, on my understanding, they do not fall under my purview, do not relate to the supplier you mentioned.
For all the money, you must have an idea. You must have an idea.
I responded to the question by saying that they are not related, the items that you mentioned.
I think Canadians would think that they are related because it is money going out of the Treasury Board, of which you are the president. $5 million, we understand, was just the first wave. Can you tell Canadians today how much more can we expect of this? How much in the second wave, third wave, fourth wave, fifth wave? How much more will we see in addition to this $5 million, which has been fraudulent?
Actually,
billing?
the Auditor General pointed out that the rules exist to address any situations in the public service of this nature, and generally speaking, they are followed. But in the case of Arrive Can and the CBSA, they were not, and that's exactly what I and Jean-Yves Duclos announced today, that we are taking measures to ensure that the public service adhered to their responsibilities under the Directive on Conflict of Interest, as well as the Manager's Guide to Professional Services, which we are updating to ensure that there is value for money for the Canadian taxpayer every single time.
Yeah. What's also concerning, Minister, is that if you look at these numbers, they actually predate the pandemic. They go back to 2018. So this would actually be major fraud that's been occurring within your government since 2018. Can you confirm that this is even pre-pandemic? This isn't related to what was necessary in critical times, but goes back to pre-pandemic. Can you confirm that, please?
I will not dispute what the Auditor General or the PBO officer is referring to in their respective reports. What I am doing from a Treasury Board perspective is taking a proactive approach to ensure that we have the rules in place so that public servants have the oversight and the accountability necessary.
I would say that is far more reactive. Now, the Department of National Defense say that there are no rules, and I will, of course, remind the Canadian public that this was the station you held prior to being in this position, no rules stopping a federal government employee in having contracts with the government. Now, as the Treasury Board president, can you say that this is the policy of the federal government? Is that the policy of the federal government?
Actually, that is absolutely false. The Section 7.1 of the Directive on Conflict of Interest
Why is it occurring?
says that there are consequences for non-compliance. Anyone employed in the federal government that hasn't complied with the requirements of the Directive on Conflict of Interest can be terminated. So there's a requirement to disclose conflicts, and if they are not disclosed or if the disclosure is inadequate, they can be fired.
Well, as key minister for this portfolio, for overseeing this, have you asked your officials how many employees would possibly be in this position?
Of course, I'm concerned with all federal public servants. We have about 300,000 such public servants, and many of them are unionized. And I work closely with all deputy ministers across departments through my officials to ensure that there's compliance with the rules. That is the role that Treasury Board will continue to play. And where there's not, there should be consequences. And that's what we are doing by updating the Manager's Guide on Professional Services.
I'll close with Dalian. Dalian was involved in procurement, the Treasury Board, and Department of Defense. All three positions which you have held. Were you familiar with Dalian? Were you aware that they were completing this type of contracting, this type of work, double dipping, as being responsible for those three portfolios?
I'm afraid I have to cut you off there. We're at our time, but perhaps you can answer on the next round.
Thank you very much. Minister, I'm going to go back to this, what is essentially a second announcement today, since the first announcement of the managerial guidelines seemed to have proven ineffective in the first 6 months. And frankly, I don't think more guidelines are what it required. Frankly, it is the ensuring that public servants are complying with them. I think that's far more important than creating new levels of bureaucracy, new levels of red tape. Now, to go back to the $5 million first wave that was announced today in the Globe and Mail by Bill Curry, the government has identified 635 IT middlemen that do no work. And in fact, as we know, the PBO has launched an entire investigation on this. How much has your government paid to IT middlemen?
So my role, and you referenced the announcement at lunch, the role of the Treasury Board president is to ensure that we have the rules and the policies and the guidelines in place. And the Auditor General stated that our rules were sufficient, and I'm taking this opportunity to even enhance them. We know that there's an RCMP investigation relating to CBSA, and we will look to follow those recommendations, but I'm taking this proactive measure of updating the guidelines in advance. Regarding your question, that information has already been provided to the committee, and I look forward to
How much is it? What's the number,
continuing
Minister?
to ensure that we provide whatever information in addition you need. I will ask Annie to provide any further information relating to that. In terms of the one supplier, however, I can confirm 103 contracts with GC Strategies from 2011 to 2024.
We have, of course, GC Strategies and Dalian, which, of course, I'm sure, given your previous role as Minister of Defense and now President of the Treasury Board, and prior to that, procurement, I hope you were aware of. You didn't verify that you were in my first round of questioning, but I hope that you were. $28 million for essentially 4 employees. How many of these 635 companies have 2 employees or less? Can you tell Canadians, please?
Actually, we're undertaking a horizontal audit, as I announced at lunch, and we will be able to provide that information. I will say that the individual at DND that is at the heart of your question was employed at DND after I left as minister. PSPC is also reviewing its supply arrangement, and I will ask Ms. Samantha Tattersall if she can comment further.
My final question, Minister, which I think is very important for Canadians. Previous to you, the Minister of Procurement and his Deputy Minister were here discussing the very important issue of conflict of interest. Now, your spouse, of course, is a director of Life Labs who received a $66.3 million contract on June 23rd in 2020, as well as a $1.9 million contract on August 20th of the same year. The Deputy Minister of Procurement said that 5 employees were fired, were released for not indicating their conflict of interest. Yet apparently you did not indicate a conflict of interest to the Ethics Commissioner. Do you believe that you should be held to the same standard as these 5 employees who were fired?
Wow, good question.
I apologize. We are out of time. However, next up is Mr. Joaria.
Can you help us with this key question? Who made the decision to choose GC Strategies?
That decision did not occur at Treasury Board, and from reading the Auditor General's report, I understand that it came at CBSA.
Okay, Minister, you were the Minister of PSPC at the time. Did you have any eyes on who made that decision? The problem we have with this issue is that there's this grave corruption scandal, and yet everybody's saying that somebody else is responsible and nobody's taking responsibility. Can you help us shed any light on that?
I can answer the question truthfully, and I did not have eyes on any of the matters relating to the application or that supplier. My mandate during the pandemic was procuring vaccines. We were the most vaccinated country in the world by July 2021.
Thanks, Commissioner. That's not the question, but thank you for your response. As we try to get to the bottom of what happened, Minister, do you think there is a role, or should be a role, or has been a role of ministerial decision-making in setting any guidelines that would prevent what happened with the Arrive scam scandal? We continuously hear that ministers have nothing to do with these decisions. That's the line we hear from you, from other ministers. But it leaves me wondering what ministers are doing here other than kind of receiving briefings about process.
The role of Treasury Board is to ensure that we have guidelines in place and rules in place, like the Directive on Conflict of Interest and like the announcement I made today to increase
But Minister, the rules weren't followed. The rules weren't followed, and then your department did nothing.
Guide.
So I'm going to now hand the time over to Mr. Brock.
I have one question, Minister. 2 middlemen companies, Government of Canada Strategies and Dalian combined, received $27 million in taxpayer dollars on the Arrive Scan app. The combined ownership of both companies is 1, 2, 3, 4 people. 2 companies. Do you agree with a majority of Canadians that there is a serious problem in this country with government contracting?
I agree with the Auditor General's report that stated there was a serious problem with the contracting undertaken by CBSA for this application, and we are prepared to follow the recommendations of the RCMP when they are forthcoming. And in advance of that, I have made an announcement to make sure that we are increasing the oversight under our guide for managers and professional services.
To my colleague, Ms. Kuzi.
Thank you.
As Receiver General for Canada, the Minister of Public Services and Procurement is responsible for overseeing all the funds coming in and going out of government accounts. What is at the bottom of every single check that comes out from the Government of Canada? The signature of the Receiver General for Canada, the Minister of Procurement. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Sousa, you've got like 13 seconds before we have to dismiss the minister.
So do you want
4
me to,
minutes, sir.
you want me to proceed?
Okay, I'm going to share I'd like to share 2 minutes of my time with the Vice Chair, Mr. Majid Jarinsky, Jawari. Minister, thank you for being here, and I appreciate you and your team and the extended and the amount of work that you do in clamping down on fraud and enhancing accountability.
Do you have anything else for the minister? Minister, thank you for joining us. Officials, thanks for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you at OGGO. If there's nothing else, we will dismiss. Thanks for sticking around for the extra 4 minutes.
Mr. Chair, I just want to thank you personally for chairing many meetings that I've appeared at over the years, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are adjourned.